I'm Evelyn Carter. I'm 31, and in my family I've always been the shadow, never the star. My father, Thomas, praises achievement like it's a weapon, and when he looks at me, all he sees is wasted potential. My brother Daniel, the golden child, wears that approval like a crown, while I carry silence like a scar. Last Christmas, everything cracked. My father raised his glass, not to bless me, but to condemn me. In front of everyone, his word branded me deeper than any scar from war. Hopeless. Ever been told you'll never amount to anything by the very people who should believe in you the most? Hit like if you've ever felt invisible at your own family's table. Comment if someone else's spotlight erased your story. Because that night was only the beginning. It started the moment I stood on the porch, staring at the house that never felt like home. The winter air pressed down like judgment itself, heavy and gray, as my hand hesitated on the brass doorknob. Inside, the scent of cinnamon and pine drifts toward me, but instead of comfort, it pierces old wounds. My father's voice is the first thing I hear, steady, cold, already measuring me against the sun he worships. I could feel their weight in the way my hand hesitated on the brass doorknob, in the way the air seemed colder on this street than anywhere else in New Jersey. 2 days before Christmas, every house glowed with decorations, bright and warm, except ours. Ours always looked impressive. Sharp lines of white lights and perfectly trimmed wreaths, but sterile like everything in this house, polished but lifeless. I pushed the door open, the familiar creak greeting me like a ghost of every year I had dragged myself back here. Inside, the scent of cinnamon and pine reached me, but instead of comfort it stabbed at old wounds. My father's voice came first, that steady baritone that once made me feel safe when I was little. Now it only carried judgment. "Evelyn," he said, standing in the foyer, his posture as rigid as ever. His eyes scanned me like a soldier inspecting a uniform, except I was his daughter, not his recruit. "You're here." No warmth, no smile, just an acknowledgement, clipped and cool. Behind him, Daniel emerged from the kitchen, jacket slung over his shoulder, expensive watch flashing as he stretched his arms wide. "Evie!" His grin was wide, effortless. He crossed the distance in a few strides and hugged me like he was the picture-perfect brother. I hugged back, stiff, already sensing the performance. Father's face softened instantly at the sight of Daniel. He patted his shoulder with approval that had never once been mine. "Your brother's had a remarkable quarter," he said, not to me, but about Daniel, as if I were a bystander in someone else's family. "Closed a 7-figure deal, didn't you?" Daniel smirked. "8, actually. Biggest yet." They walked toward the dining room together, leaving me standing in the hall with my bag still in my hand. My mother appeared then, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her smile timid and apologetic. "Evelyn, sweetheart," she whispered, embracing me with the kind of tenderness that made me want to crumble. Her arms lingered as if she could shield me from what had already begun. "Come in, dinner's almost ready." The dining table was set with silver polished to a shine, candles flickering in perfect symmetry. I slid into my seat quietly, watching Daniel launch into stories about his company, his investors, his vision. Every word he spoke seemed designed to fill the room with his triumphs. Father leaned forward, attentive, pride gleaming in his eyes. "That's the Carter spirit," he said. "Drive, ambition, results." My fork paused over my plate. I wondered if he realized he had never once used those words for me. Daniel turned, feigning generosity. "Evelyn, what about you? Still, out there doing your thing?" He left the words hanging, as vague as possible, so the silence itself became judgment. I nodded once. "Still doing my thing." Father's jaw tightened. "We'll talk about it later." His tone, sliced like a blade, later meant criticism. Later meant another reminder that I had disappointed him, that my choices carried no value in his world. The rest of the meal unfolded like theater. Daniel performed. Father applauded. Mother filled glasses in silence. I played my role too, the quiet daughter, the shadow, the one who swallowed words instead of speaking them. When dessert came, no one touched it. Daniel checked his phone. Father straightened his tie. Mother collected plates that were still half full. The air grew so thick I felt I might choke on it. Dinner ended in silence, tension thick in the air. I slipped out before anyone noticed, pulling on my coat, boots crunching against the frost as I stepped into the night. Snowflakes landed on my hair, melting instantly, like fragile hopes disappearing the moment they touched me. I stood on the porch, looking at the glow of other houses on the street. Families laughing inside, warmth spilling out into the cold. I whispered to myself, voice steady despite the storm gathering in my chest. Tomorrow night will be worse. Snow was never just snow for me, it carried the sting of Afghanistan. Whenever it fell back home, soft and quiet, I remembered the way it cut into my skin halfway across the world, sharp as glass, and heavy with the smell of diesel and blood. It wasn't decoration then, it was survival. The silence I held at that dinner table, swallowing every barb, was the same silence I had carried in the desert. Out there, silence was oxygen, it kept you alive when noise could give you away. In 2018, I was 26 and posted to a remote outpost where the mountains were white with snow but burned with fire at night. The cold there didn't forgive weakness. It gnawed at your fingers until you couldn't tell skin from ice, until your own breath turned traitor, freezing in your lungs. We were medics, barely more than kids, but the men around us were bleeding and broken, and they didn't care about our ages. They needed hands that worked fast, that didn't tremble. My hands never stopped shaking inside my gloves, but I forced them steady each time I patched another wound. We slept in tents that rattled under the wind, heating pads that failed more often than they worked. Every morning, drills, marches, endless checks. Every night, whispers about who might not make it until dawn. The blizzard came the night the alarm sounded. A convoy had been ambushed on a road cut into the mountain, and survivors were pinned down. Orders were clear: wait until the storm passed. But storms in Afghanistan didn't pass quickly. Waiting meant bodies stiffening in the snow. I remember standing at the edge of the camp, the snow slashing sideways into my eyes, and feeling that terrible tug between obedience and life. I went anyway. 5 of us did, against command. Visibility was a blur of white. My boots sank deep, every step heavier than the last. Somewhere ahead, men screamed through the wind. When I found them, 3 were unconscious, 2 barely clinging to life. Blood froze the instant it touched the snow, dark stains spreading like ink. I hauled one onto my back, dragged another by his vest, each movement like drowning in ice. The storm didn't care. It shoved me down, filled my mouth with frost, made the world spin. But faces blurred in the snow pulled me back up. I told myself, one more step, just one, and then another. My legs were numb by the time we stumbled into camp. A line of broken men tethered to me like ghosts. I don't even remember falling. I only remember the ground rising too fast, and blackness swallowing me whole. When I woke, heat lamps glowed above me, their light weak, but enough to remind me I was alive. The men I dragged were alive too, groaning, coughing, still breathing. Frostbite gnawed at my hands, purple marks etched into my skin like tattoos of the night. A shadow leaned over me, the outline of my commanding officer. His voice was low, meant only for me. She just rewrote history, but it'll be buried in silence. And buried it was. No reports, no headlines, no parades. Just another storm that never reached home. I kept the photos, the notes, the memories locked in a diary stained with ice. Proof that what I did mattered, even if no one would ever say it aloud. Sarah Mitchell always knew when I was one breath away from breaking. She had that way of looking at me, tilting her head slightly, reading every tremor in my voice, every flicker behind my eyes. On Christmas morning, as bells from the church down the street chimed faintly through the air, she was already waiting at the corner cafe, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. The night before clung to me like smoke. My father's voice, the cold dismissal in his eyes, Daniel's smirk, all of it pressed against my ribs, threatening to crack me open. I hadn't slept. Instead, I carried a weight heavier than any pack I'd hauled through the mountains. The battered leather journal and a small envelope of photographs, hidden deep in my bag. When I slid into the booth across from Sarah, she didn't greet me with words at first. She reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. "You didn't have to text. I knew," she said softly. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon, the kind of warmth that tried to convince you the world outside wasn't frozen solid. I envied everyone else sipping their lattes, wrapped in scarves, their biggest worry, which pie to serve later tonight. Last night was... My throat closed around the words. I forced them out. He humiliated me in front of everyone, again. Sarah's gaze hardened, but her tone stayed gentle. "You don't need to explain. I could see it in your message. Tell me what's really crushing you." I hesitated. The journal felt like it was burning a hole in my bag. For years I had kept it close, never letting anyone read it. The photographs were grainy, some blurred from the snowstorm, but they were real blood on ice, the hollow eyes of men clinging to life, the night I had dragged them back from death. Proof of a story no one wanted told. I pulled the items from my bag, laying them on the table between us. My fingers trembled. This is what they'll never acknowledge, what they told me to forget. Sarah didn't move at first. Her eyes scanned the faded ink, the frozen faces. She pressed her lips together, a muscle twitching in her jaw. Evelyn, do you realize what you're handing me? I do. My voice cracked, but I kept going. And I'm begging you don't publish it. Not now. Not yet. Promise me. She leaned back, exhaling slowly, as if to release the storm building inside her. You carried this alone all these years. Why trust me with it now? Because I can't carry it anymore, I whispered. And if I collapse under it, no one will ever know the truth. You'll know. You can decide when the world is ready. Her eyes softened then, though they shone with the sharp edge of resolve. She reached across again, resting her hand over mine, steady and firm. Justice delayed isn't justice denied, she said, her voice low but unshakable. The words wrapped around me like a shield, fragile yet powerful. I wanted to believe her. The weight in my chest loosened, just slightly. For the first time in years, I didn't feel entirely alone. The cafe door opened, letting in a gust of icy wind, and just as I thought we'd reached a moment of calm, Sarah's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced down, and her eyes widened. The subject line glared up at us in bold letters. Medal of Honor Ceremony. Candidate Selection. He raised his glass not to bless me, but to condemn me. The crystal caught the light of the candles, scattering it across the long dining table where our entire family had gathered. Laughter bounced against the vaulted ceiling of the Carter home, polished silverware glinted, and the air was thick with the scent of rosemary lamb and spiced wine. It should have been festive, warm, but every smile at that table felt sharpened, waiting for the first drop of blood. Christmas Eve was always a performance here. Margaret, my mother, had set the stage with perfection. Garlands along the banister, golden bows on each chair, the family china polished until you could see your reflection in it. But it wasn't her care anyone noticed. It was Daniel's arrival, his entrance with keys dangling to his brand new car, the glint of a Rolex catching the firelight. My father leaned toward him eager, hanging on his every word like Daniel was the Messiah come early. Daniel tapped his glass for attention, flashing that confident grin that drew everyone in. Closed the deal of the year last week, he announced. 8 figures. The firm practically begged me to take it. Gasps of admiration circled the table. An uncle clapped him on the back. One cousin raised her eyebrows, whispering to another about Daniel's brilliance. My father's chest swelled. That's my son, he said, pride ringing in every syllable. That's what it means to be a Carter. Drive. Success. Legacy. His words echoed in my head, too familiar, too cutting, because in his eyes, I was none of those things. I tried to focus on my plate, tracing the edge of the fork against porcelain, reminding myself to stay calm. But the weight of comparison was unbearable, the spotlight moving inevitably my way. It always did. And then it came. My father turned abruptly, eyes narrowing on me. The smile that had stretched so easily for Daniel twisted into disdain. And you, he said, his voice carrying over the laughter that quickly died down. You're hopeless. The word dropped like a stone into water, sending ripples of silence before the inevitable reaction. A chuckle from the far end, a cough covered by a smirk, whispers rustling like dry leaves. The shame burned hot across my skin. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I wanted to shout, to slam my fist against the table, to demand that he take it back. But the lessons of Afghanistan had taught me the strength of silence. Silence could cut deeper than a scream. So I sat there, spine straight, lips pressed together. My father leaned forward, eyes gleaming as if my restraint confirmed his judgment. You've brought nothing but shame, he declared, his words ringing louder than the clinking of any glass. The table buzzed with murmurs, some awkward, some entertained. Daniel looked down at his plate, feigning discomfort but not enough to intervene. My mother shifted beside me, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her napkin, too afraid to speak. The air grew suffocating. I swallowed hard, my rage locked tight behind clenched teeth. Each second of silence was its own rebellion, louder than any protest I could have screamed. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I finally lifted my gaze, meeting his. The room blurred around us, every flickering candle, every shifting body disappearing, until there was only him and me. My eyes didn't waver. One day, you'll see. The world outside was white, but inside me burned a storm. Snow had swallowed the streets of New Jersey, turning the sidewalks into rivers of ice and the rooftops into pale mounds. I pushed out of the Carter dining hall as if I were breaking through prison gates, my breath cutting sharp into the night, boots sinking deep into the drift. Behind me, laughter still flickered faintly, muted by heavy walls and heavier silence. I walked fast, almost running, the cold slapping my face until it stung. Each crunch of snow beneath me was a heartbeat, pounding louder than the echoes of my father's words. Hopeless. Shame. Those syllables clawed at me, but I refused to let them stick. Every step was defiance, every lungful of freezing air a promise I would not collapse under his weight. "Evelyn!" My mother's voice chased me, thin and wavering. I turned reluctantly as she hurried out, shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, slippers sinking clumsily into the frost. Her face was pale under the porch light, eyes wet with something between guilt and desperation. She caught my arm when she reached me, breathless. "I should have stopped him. I should have defended you. Forgive me, Evelyn. Forgive me." I covered her hands with mine, holding them steady against the shiver of the night. For a moment, I wanted to let the anger pour out, to ask her why she had always stayed silent. But her trembling said more than excuses ever could. She was trapped too, just in a different kind of prison. "Don't worry, Mom," I said softly, my voice carrying a steel she didn't expect. "Justice never dies." Her eyes widened at the certainty in mine. For once, she didn't try to hush me, didn't beg me to keep peace. She simply nodded, lips pressed tight, and let me go. I walked further down the street, snowflakes gathering on my coat like ash, until the family home was only a glow in the distance. I pulled my phone from my pocket, its screen lighting up my face in the dark. A new message waited. "Sarah, it's happening. Be ready." The storm inside me surged higher. I knew she wouldn't send words like that without meaning. My fingers were numb as I opened my email, heart hammering like a drumline in my chest. The subject line snapped into focus. Medal of Honor ceremony, official invitation. My breath caught. For a second, the snow and the street and the night disappeared. All that existed was the glow of the screen and the truth I had carried alone for years, now about to burst into the open. I tapped the message open. At the bottom of the invitation, bold letters declared what I had never thought I'd read in my lifetime. "You are selected." Christmas had ended, but my father's words lingered like a wound that refused to close. The house was quieter than it had been in days, the echoes of last night's celebration still clinging to the air like smoke. I stood in my childhood bedroom, suitcase open on the bed, the zipper gaping like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. One by one, I folded my clothes with mechanical precision, each garment a shield, each fold a step closer to leaving this place behind. The carpet muffled my footsteps, but nothing could soften the memory of his voice. "You're hopeless." It replayed on a loop, sharper than the cold morning light spilling through the curtains. I pressed my hands against the suitcase lid, as though the weight of my body might keep the rage inside from spilling everywhere. A creak in the hallway broke my trance. My father walked past, his polished shoes clicking softly against the floorboards. He didn't pause, didn't glance my way, didn't even acknowledge the sound of my packing. His silence was worse than a scolding. He carried himself as if he had already won, as if by saying nothing now, he could crown last night's cruelty a permanent victory. The air seemed to bend around his presence, swallowing me whole, reminding me that in his eyes I was less than invisible. I swallowed the bitterness and returned to my task, sliding the zipper closed with finality. My hands trembled, not from weakness but from restraint. A soft knock came at the door. My mother slipped inside, her shawl draped loosely, her eyes downcast. "You're leaving," she whispered, though it wasn't a question. She sat at the edge of the bed, her fingers knotting the fringe of her shawl like a penance. "I should have spoken last night. I should have told him to stop." The guilt in her voice was heavier than any insult. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she could have changed something, but we both knew better. Father's words were immovable stone, carved deeper by every silence around the table. I placed a hand over hers, stilling her nervous movements. "Mom," I said gently, "you don't have to carry his sins." She looked at me, startled by the steadiness in my tone. When she left, I turned toward the mirror. The glass reflected a face I barely recognized, eyes darker, jaw clenched, skin pale against the storm still raging inside. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the surface, and whispered, steady and certain, I don't need his belief, I only need mine. The words didn't erase the pain, but they anchored me. They lit something small and fierce inside, a spark that promised survival even in this house of shadows. My phone vibrated on the dresser, cutting through the silence. The screen lit up with Sarah's name. A single message glowed bright in the dim room. Countdown begins. 3 days. The desert was merciless, but it taught me how to outlast storms. Snow in New Jersey reminded me of ice against my skin, but Afghanistan in winter was a different kind of cruelty wind that stripped the flesh raw, sand that sliced at every inch of exposed skin, and nights so cold your bones ached like they would split in two. I carried those nights inside me like scars no one could see. It was December 2018. The outpost pressed against the jagged ridges of mountains that offered no shelter from the wind. We had grown used to waiting in silence, to nights broken by sudden gunfire, to mornings that began with counting who hadn't made it through the dark. I was a medic then, trained to patch bodies like broken machinery, trained to hold back fear until it turned into numbness. That night, alarms split the frozen air. A patrol had been ambushed on the road outside the camp. The radio crackled with reports multiple soldiers down, survivors pinned by enemy fire. Command's voice cut sharp. Hold position. The blizzard is too severe. We wait for dawn. But dawn meant death. I knew it the moment I heard the screams faint over the radio. If we waited, the storm would claim them before the enemy did. My hands tightened on the strap of my medic kit. Orders weighed like chains, but something heavier pressed against my chest, the knowledge that doing nothing would haunt me forever. I moved before I could talk myself out of it. Snow stung my face, the wind pushing me back as if the night itself wanted me to fail. 3 others followed, faces set with grim resolve. We slipped into the blizzard, guided only by the sound of distant gunfire and the faint cries of men drowning in the storm. When we found them, 5 soldiers lay scattered, half buried in drifts, crimson staining the white. One of them, Sergeant Miller, clutched his leg, blood soaking through his fatigues, his lips turning blue. Leave me, he rasped, but I shoved gauze into the wound, refusing to listen. I hooked one man under each arm, dragging, pulling, ignoring the fire that reigned in the distance. My legs screamed with every step, boots sinking ankle-deep. Frost crept into my gloves, numbing my fingers until I could barely feel the bodies I was hauling. But I couldn't stop. Not when their eyes begged me to keep going. A bullet whistled past, so close it kissed the air by my ear. I dropped flat, shielding the men with my body. Another medic covered me, shouting over the storm. "We can't! Yes, we can!" I screamed back, though my voice was swallowed by the wind. I rose, dragging again, Miller's weight heavy across my shoulder. His breath came ragged, shallow, but still there. Step after step, we became shadows crawling through snow and sand, inching toward the outpost's faint lights in the distance. By the time we stumbled into camp, my vision blurred. The men I carried were alive, barely, clinging to life by threads of breath. My body gave out the second I felt the solid ground of the barracks. Darkness crashed over me. When I woke, Miller lay beside me, bandaged, his face pale but alive. His lips cracked into the faintest smile. "You saved us all," he whispered, his voice breaking but steady enough to carve into my memory forever. I wanted to believe it was enough, that their survival meant the truth would be told. But as I blinked against the harsh glow of the lamps, my commanding officer leaned close, voice low, final. "This story won't leave this desert." Daniel never missed a chance to remind me that I was the family's blemish. If the Carter name shone like polished marble in New Jersey society, he made sure to paint me as the crack in its surface. That evening, the 25th of December, he chose an upscale Manhattan restaurant as his stage. The place glittered with chandeliers and hushed wealth, where every table seemed to hum with expensive secrets. I hadn't wanted to come, but Father insisted, and resistance in front of him only bred sharper wounds. So I found myself seated at a long mahogany table, surrounded by Daniel's business partners, men and women in tailored suits, their watches flashing as bright as their smiles. They toasted him before the first course even arrived. Daniel thrived in the spotlight. He leaned back, his voice carrying over the clink of glasses. "It's been a record year for Carter Solutions," he declared. "New contracts, new clients, expansion to Europe on the horizon. We're just getting started." His partners applauded, one of them remarking how unusual it was for someone his age to command so much. My father beamed, the same pride he never once spared for me written all over his face. Daniel is proof of what it means to be a Carter, he said. Ambition, discipline, results. I sipped my water, letting the ice clink softly, a sound no one noticed. When the entrees arrived, Daniel leaned toward me. His smile sugar-coated, but his tone sharp enough to cut. You know, Evie, I could always find a place for you in the company. Something manageable. A desk job, maybe. That way you wouldn't feel left out while we run the real business. The table laughed lightly, as though it were a harmless joke. Father chuckled, too, nodding as though Daniel's suggestion made perfect sense. A pity job for your sister, yes. That might give her something to do. I felt the heat climb my neck, but I forced my fork to move slowly, deliberately, refusing to let them see me falter. A woman across the table, curious, asked, So, Evelyn, what is it you do? Before I could open my mouth, Daniel cut in smoothly, leaning back in his chair with theatrical ease. She's basically unemployed, he said. The words landed like stones. Some of the partners chuckled, others looked politely away, the discomfort just enough to sting. I kept my face still, hiding the storm boiling inside. My silence became a shield again, though every second of it felt like swallowing glass. Father laughed, shaking his head. Hopeless, he muttered, almost fondly, as if it were just a quirk of mine, not a wound he kept tearing open. I lowered my gaze, pretending to study the candlelight flickering against the wine glasses, though my vision blurred with rage. What Daniel didn't see, what none of them noticed, was the quiet figure at a nearby table. Sarah sat with her phone angled casually, eyes locked on us, every word caught in her recording. Her expression was unreadable, but I knew her well enough to recognize the iron beneath her calm. Sometimes, justice needs the courage of someone who can bear witness. Sarah Mitchell knew that truth better than most. The newsroom on the morning of the 26th of December buzzed with the low hum of keyboards, printers spitting paper, and televisions flashing headlines of politics and Wall Street. Yet at her desk, tucked into the corner where the light from the frosted window spilled across scattered notes, the only story that mattered sat open on her screen. Mine. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, hesitant for once. Spread across her desk were the photographs I had given her, their edges curling, the images grainy but undeniable. Blood frozen black against snow. Soldiers half buried in drifts, eyes wide with the raw terror of almost dying. And me, my shadow, in one corner of a photo, dragging a body through the blizzard. Alongside them lay the war diary, my handwriting jagged, some pages blurred where melted snow had stained the ink. A colleague leaned over her partition, curiosity piqued. Sarah, what are you working on? You've been buried in that file for hours. She minimized the window quickly, but not before the headline draft flashed across the screen. He whistled low. That's heavy. Why isn't it live already? Stories like that front page in a heartbeat. Another voice chimed in from the next desk. If it's real, the world deserves to know. Why sit on it? Sarah's phone vibrated on the desk. She picked it up, saw my name, and answered quietly. Evelyn, my voice was low but steady. You have everything. The diary, the pictures, the truth, but not yet. Don't give it to them yet. Why wait? She asked, her pen twirling anxiously between her fingers. This could change everything now. Because it has to matter, I said. It has to land when the whole world is watching. Otherwise, it'll be another story buried on page 12, forgotten by morning. Let the world see it when it matters. Her silence was long, but when she spoke, it carried the same weight as when she promised me at the cafe. Then we'll wait. But the moment will come, Evelyn. You know that. She hung up, turning back to her screen. The colleagues hadn't moved, their faces a mix of frustration and admiration. So we sit on a bombshell? One muttered. Sarah straightened, her resolve crystallizing. We don't bury it, we time it. She reopened the draft and typed with purpose, the words flying across the screen until the headline was bold, unflinching. From hopeless to heroine. Her finger hovered, then pressed save. The file clicked shut with a finality that made her pulse quicken. Just then, her phone buzzed again. A new notification lit the screen. The sender, United States Army. The subject line in bold letters, ceremony details confirmed, the 26th of December, New York City. Tomorrow, the stage will not just honor me, it will judge him. That thought beat like a second pulse in my head as I stared out the hotel window, watching New York City shimmer in restless light. The streets below were alive with cabs, neon signs, people rushing home or to bars, oblivious that tomorrow the city would hold its breath for me. The curtains swayed slightly in the draft, and for a moment I let myself imagine it was snow again. Afghanistan's cruel snow, New Jersey's suffocating snow, but no, this was something else. This was the cold of anticipation. The email sat open on my laptop, its official tone as sharp as a blade. General Victor Hayes's assistant had sent the final instructions: arrival time, seating arrangements, uniform details, the words I would need to recite when called. My eyes skimmed them, but my mind refused to absorb. All I could see was the audience, the flash of cameras, and one face among them, my father's. Would he sit tall, arms crossed, daring the world to recognize me? Or would he shrink under the truth when it came, too late for his pride to survive? Sarah moved around the room with restless energy, her laptop balanced on the desk, cables snaking toward a power outlet. She had been with me since I checked in, her presence like a steadying hand even when my insides twisted into knots. She looked up at me now, her expression unreadable, the glow of her screen reflecting off her glasses. "I scheduled it," she said finally. Her voice was calm, but the undercurrent of tension carried across the room. I turned, heart-lurching. "Scheduled what?" "The article." She didn't flinch. "It will go live during the ceremony. The second your name is called, the world will see it. The photos, the diary, Sergeant Miller's testimony. From hopeless to heroine." I sank into the chair by the window, pressing my palms together to still their trembling. "You're playing with fire." "No," she said, crossing the room to stand in front of me. "I'm making sure the fire finally burns where it should." Her conviction should have calmed me, but the storm inside only grew louder. I imagined the click of 100 camera shutters, the collective gasp when the headline hit, and then his face. My father's face, contorting, scrambling to hold onto the mask he had worn my entire life. The thought thrilled me and terrified me in equal measure. "What if I break?" I whispered. "What if I look at him, and all I see is the little girl he crushed?" Sarah crouched until her eyes were level with mine. "Then let them see you break, because even in breaking, you'll be stronger than he ever was." Her words cut through me, sharp and merciful. She reached out, squeezed my hand once, then leaned closer. "When they clap for you, he'll have nowhere to hide." I closed my eyes, the image searing itself into my mind, applause crashing down like a tidal wave, his silence drowning beneath it. On Sarah's laptop, the countdown timer blinked steadily, each second dragging me closer to the reckoning. The numbers ticked lower, glowing in the dim room, marking the hours until morning. The spotlight seared my skin, but my father's words still rang louder than the applause. The hall shimmered with crystal chandeliers and flags that seemed to breathe in the air conditioning, their folds catching the light of cameras flashing like 1,000 relentless eyes. Rows of dignitaries filled the front, polished shoes gleaming beneath pressed uniforms, medals shining against immaculate jackets. Beyond them, a sea of civilians and journalists craned forward, pens poised, lenses trained on the stage. My name echoed across the hall. Staff Sergeant Evelyn Carter. The sound froze me for half a heartbeat, then pushed me forward. My boots struck the stage with a rhythm I couldn't ignore. Each step carried me closer to the podium, to the weight of history about to be placed on my chest. The faces blurred, but one face remained sharp in my mind, my father's, rigid and unyielding, carved in stone. I didn't dare look for him yet. General Victor Hayes stood waiting, tall and solemn, his hands clasped behind his back. His uniform bore rows of ribbons and stars that told their own story, yet his eyes softened when they met mine. He gestured for me to stand beside him, and the applause thundered like rolling waves. I stood there, spine straight, the sound crashing against me, but never quite breaking through the echo of "You're hopeless." The general's voice cut through the din. "This nation honors sacrifice not measured in wealth or titles, but in courage when hope is almost lost." He paused, letting the silence sink deep before continuing. "Sergeant Evelyn Carter displayed that courage in Afghanistan, winter of 2018, when she risked her life in a blizzard under enemy fire to bring 5 wounded men back to safety. She endured frostbite, hypothermia, and the unrelenting storm of battle, yet she did not falter." Murmurs rippled through the audience, surprise mixing with awe. I heard pens scratch faster, cameras fire more urgently. The general raised the medal, its ribbon glinting gold and blue under the light. This woman saved lives at the cost of her own blood. His voice struck like a bell, clear and final. The ribbon brushed against my neck as he pinned it to my uniform. The metal rested heavily against my chest, and for the first time in years, the weight I carried was visible to everyone else. Applause erupted, rising higher and higher until it shook the very air. People rose to their feet, their clapping relentless, their cheers like fire racing through the hall. I let the sound wash over me, refusing to bow under it, refusing to let tears break free. I didn't need their pity, I needed their recognition, and now I had it. Still, beneath the roar, I could hear the ghost of my father's judgment, a whisper that fought to survive against the avalanche of noise. Hopeless. The cameras turned, swinging toward the audience. My mother's face gleamed wet with tears, her hands clasped tightly to her lips. Daniel sat stiff, the easy smirk wiped from his mouth, his jaw tight with something that wasn't pride. And then him. The lens caught Thomas Carter, my father, frozen in his seat. The color had drained from his face, his eyes wide, unblinking, caught between disbelief and the crumbling of the story he had built about me. The applause hadn't even faded when the screens lit up behind me. At first I thought it was part of the ceremony, a slideshow of soldiers, a patriotic reel meant to underscore the medal pinned to my chest. But then the headline struck, bold letters filling the giant monitors that framed the stage. From hopeless to heroine, my breath caught. Sarah had pulled the trigger. Gasps rippled through the audience as images began to cycle across the screens. Grainy photos of snow and blood, men half buried in drifts, and my shadow, bent beneath the weight of bodies I refused to leave behind. Then came scans of my journal, jagged handwriting describing the storm, the bullets, the frozen silence of near death. Words I had hidden for years now screamed in 20-foot letters for the world to see. The crowd erupted, not with applause this time, but with noise reporters shouting questions, cameras firing like gunshots, phones buzzing as the story spread faster than wildfire. I could feel the ground shift beneath me, the stage becoming not just a place of honor but a courtroom, a spotlight of truth no one could dim. General Hayes glanced at me, surprise flickering across his face, but he did not move to stop it. His silence was its own acknowledgement. From the corner of my vision, I saw Sarah, her expression calm, unshaken, as if this was always the plan. She stood near the media row, her phone still glowing in her hand. Then a voice rose above the din. "It's true," it said, rough and steady. A man pushed his way through the crowd, decorated uniform gleaming, cane tapping against the floor. Sergeant Miller. My chest tightened as his face came into view, older, lined, but undeniably him. He reached the foot of the stage, his voice carrying with the force of someone who no longer cared about protocol. "I was there. She dragged me, and 4 others, through that storm. I wouldn't be alive without her." His hand shook as he pointed toward me. "She didn't just save us. She redefined what courage meant." The hall fell into stunned silence. The weight of his testimony pressed down like a hammer striking iron. Cameras swung toward him, toward me, then inevitably toward my family. Reporters swarmed, questions overlapping. "Thomas Carter, are you proud of your daughter now? Do you deny her heroism? Why did you call her hopeless?" The air turned electric, every lens and microphone angled toward the man who had spent his life belittling me. My father's face, caught in the glare of light and scrutiny, paled further. His jaw worked as if to form words, but nothing came. I finally let myself look directly at him, the years of silence condensed into one sharp glance. My lips moved, a whisper meant only for me, though I knew the cameras would catch it on my face. Now the world knows. Silence is louder when it comes from the man who once thundered over me. The backstage corridor smelled faintly of polish and sweat, the hush after the ceremony broken only by the shuffle of feet and the hiss of press microphones being packed away. My medal weighed heavily against my chest, but heavier still was the moment waiting just around the corner. I turned into the narrow hallway, and there he was, Thomas Carter, my father flanked by Daniel, both faces pale and rigid under the harsh, fluorescent light. For years, his voice had been the constant storm in my life, tearing at every accomplishment until it collapsed. Now he stood with his mouth pressed thin, as if sound itself had abandoned him. A television mounted high on the wall replayed the live broadcast. Reporters' voices overlapped. "Thomas Carter, are you proud of your daughter now?" Then came the clips already circling the feeds, replayed on loop, his words at Christmas Eve dinner. "The cruelest dagger. You're hopeless. You've brought nothing but shame." each repetition was a nail driven deeper, his authority shattered in high definition for the world to see. Margaret stepped into the corridor, her eyes swollen from tears, but this time her shoulders squared. She came straight to me, ignoring him. Her arms wrapped around me in full view of the cameras still lingering nearby. "I'm proud of you," she said aloud, her voice trembling but firm. The microphones caught it, broadcast it, sealing it into the record forever. For once, her loyalty was not buried in silence. Daniel shifted awkwardly beside father, the arrogance gone. He angled his body away from the cameras, shielding his face with a hand, the same face that had worn smug superiority the night he offered me a pity job. Now reporters hissed his name too, reminding him that every word had been recorded by Sarah. His empire of bravado crumbled, humiliation burning hotter than any spotlight. Father tried to step forward, chest puffed as if to reclaim the ground he had lost. But when his eyes met mine, the thunder that had ruled my childhood was gone. His mouth opened, lips trembling with words that refused to form. Perhaps he wanted to apologize, perhaps to scold, but the moment for both had long passed. All he could offer me now was silence. I let him stand there in it, drowning. The weight of decades shifted, finally balanced. My voice came low and steady, sharp enough to slice the air between us. "Hopeless? Today, that word belongs to you." The next morning, America woke up to my face and to my father's shame. I saw it in the newspapers stacked in the hotel lobby. My image in uniform splashed across front pages, metal glinting, chin lifted. Above it, headlines roared, "Hopeless? Medal of Honor heroine silences critics." By breakfast, the words had traveled far beyond New York. Screens in airports, TVs in diners, phones in every pocket all carried the same story. Sarah's timing had been flawless. At the exact moment the medal touched my chest, the article had gone live. Now clips from the ceremony spliced together with her headline, my photographs, and the footage of Sergeant Miller's testimony. The story was unstoppable, each share amplifying the fall of the narrative my father had clung to all his life. Social media burned with it. Hashtags climbed into trending columns, number hopeless no more, and number from hopeless to heroine. My father's words, once private daggers at our table, now echoed as public condemnation of him. Viral videos played on loop. His Christmas Eve sneer, his dismissal at the restaurant, his silence when the reporters demanded pride. Millions watched the man who had called me hopeless shrink in real time. At home in New Jersey, Margaret called, her voice thick but steadier than I had ever heard it. "The neighbors know, Evelyn. They've stopped pretending not to see. They've stopped defending him." I could almost hear the quiet satisfaction in her tone, as though decades of standing in his shadow had cracked open to let light pour in. Daniel wasn't spared either. Sarah's recordings from the Manhattan dinner leaked his voice mocking, his words branding me as, basically unemployed. The footage spread with merciless speed, paired with the article's headline, until his arrogance became a national punchline. His partners began to distance themselves publicly. One press release already announced a review of Carter Solutions' leadership. Through it all, Sarah sat at my side, fielding calls from networks and journalists, her phone buzzing until it seemed alive. "They all want interviews," she said, half amused, half exhausted. "But they don't get you yet, not until we're ready." "And father?" Margaret's voice cracked when she told me. "He hasn't left his room. He won't answer the door. He just sits in the dark." The image of Thomas Carter, once thunder, once iron retreating into silence, struck me harder than any of his words ever had. His kingdom of judgment, dismantled by truth he could no longer command. That night, I sat with Sarah in the hotel suite, city lights flickering outside the window like restless stars. She closed her laptop at last, turned to me, her expression soft but resolute. "This isn't just your victory, it's the victory of everyone silent." I never needed his apology, only the truth, finally spoken aloud. A week had passed since the ceremony, and Central Park breathed with the slow thaw of winter. Snowbanks sagged into puddles, sunlight fractured through bare branches, and children shrieked with laughter as they chased each other across the damp grass. I sat on a bench near the frozen pond, metal hidden beneath my coat, notebook resting across my knees. The city hummed around me, alive and unbothered, but inside I felt the quiet weight of a chapter closing. Sarah sat beside me, scarf wrapped high on her neck, eyes scanning the families passing by. For once, her phone lay untouched in her bag. She leaned back, exhaling a plume of white into the crisp air. Do you ever regret it? She asked suddenly. The years you stayed quiet? The nights you let him call you hopeless without fighting back? I traced a finger along the spine of my journal, the one that had carried my silence across years, across continents. No, I said softly. Without silence, justice wouldn't have roared this loud. My voice surprised me, calm and steady, carrying none of the bitterness I once swallowed whole. Sarah tilted her head, studying me as though searching for cracks. Finding none, she smiled faintly. You're stronger than you realize. The crunch of cautious footsteps pulled my gaze down the path. Margaret appeared, wrapped in her winter coat, eyes tired but softer than I remembered. She lowered herself onto the bench beside me, her hands trembling as they covered mine. For a long moment she said nothing, only looked at me with the tenderness of years wasted in silence. Finally, her voice slipped out in a whisper almost lost to the wind. Your father reads that article every day. The image struck me sharper than any of his insults. Thomas Carter, once thunder and stone, now hunched in private, facing the truth he had tried to bury. Not apologizing, not admitting, but forced to confront what the world already knew. That was enough. I opened my journal, the one that had started it all, and flipped to a blank page. The pen felt steady in my hand, lighter than ever before. I closed it gently, holding the weight of it one last time, and whispered into the cold air. The words meant only for me, yet strong enough to echo in memory. Hopeless? Number, I was just waiting for my moment. The storm that began with humiliation ended with applause that no lie could drown. The once unyielding voice of a father fell silent, and the daughter he branded hopeless rose as a symbol that truth, though buried, cannot be erased. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. Like snow melting under the first sun, dignity reclaimed shines brighter because it survived the cold. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. Like, share, subscribe, and leave your thoughts below. Comment 1 if you felt the same fire of justice. Comment 2 if you're still waiting for a different ending.